You all read the title, so let's just get right off into this one. DNA test has proven that some Egyptian mummies have more genetic relationship with Middle Eastern individuals from the Levant area and Europeans than they do with sub-Saharan Africans. You can do a Google search, DNA test on mummies. This was a recent study. You may find several different articles on it, so you may not actually find the article that I'm going to be reading from, but if you look into this, you'll find the general information that I'm about to read. So I want to start this video off by just reading the article, addressing the article, and getting you all acclimated with the information, with the find, with the genetic information. Okay, so the article that I pulled up and that I have referenced, the title of it is "Scientists Thought Ancient Egyptian Mummies Didn't Have Any DNA Left. They Were Wrong." And this particular article is by Lizzie Wade. She's not the one that did the study. Again, you will find several articles on this topic. Okay, it says, ancient Egyptian mummies preserve many details of the deceased. Facial features, signs of illness, even tattoos. But not, it seemed, DNA. After trying repeatedly to extract it, many scientists were convinced that the hot desert climate and perhaps the chemicals used in mummification destroyed any genetic material long ago. Now, a team of ancient DNA specialists has successfully sequenced genomes from 90 ancient Egyptian mummies. 90 ancient Egyptian mummies. The game-changing results give scientists their first insight into the genetics of ordinary ancient Egyptians, which changed surprisingly little through centuries of conquest. The sequencing success, reported this week in Nature Communications, finally proves to everyone that there's DNA preserved in ancient Egyptian mummies, says Albert Zink, a biological anthropologist at the Institute for Mummy Studies in Bolzano, Italy. Now, I highlighted this part myself. He participated in a 2010 study that identified DNA sequences from 16 ancient Egyptian royal mummies, including Tutankhamun, King Tut. What they're talking about now, he participated in a 2010 study, is a reference not to the information that will be covered in this video, but to an earlier study that he did on royal Egyptian mummies, just showing that this guy has a history of dealing with the genetic makeup of mummies and DNA testing Egyptian mummies. It continues. But that study used the study from 2010, but that study used polymerase chain reaction, a method that efficiently finds and extracts targeted DNA fragments, but cannot always reliably distinguish between ancient DNA and modern contamination. Basically saying the tests that were ran back in 2010 on the royal Egyptian mummies was somewhat unreliable because it really wasn't efficient at determining or distinguishing between the ancient DNA that was found in the specimen and the modern DNA that was found on the specimen due to contamination from the archaeological dig, from contamination, moving it from lab to lab, being handled by the scientists, etc., etc. And this was one of the issues, side note, this was one of the issues that came up with the whole King Tut thing, how it was stated that after DNA analysis, King Tut was found to be have a closer genetic relationship to Europeans and Africans, and there was a big hoopla about that. Now, I'm not going to waste time going into that particular study, but it was saying that the methods used in that King Tut study and subsequent studies using this method from 2010 wasn't very reliable at distinguishing between the ancient DNA and the modern DNA contaminants, saying that some of that DNA from King Tut that made him more closely related to Europeans could have come from contamination. That's basically what they're saying. It wasn't a very reliable test. But it goes on to say, the new study led by Johannes Cross, a geneticist at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Jena, Germany, used next-generation sequencing methods to read stretches of any DNA present in a sample and fish out those that resembled human DNA. The complete reads allowed the team to spot telltale damage patterns associated only with ancient DNA. That makes the new analysis much more reliable, says Hans Schroeder, an ancient DNA researcher at the University of Copenhagen. It succeeds where previous studies on Egyptian mummies have failed or fallen short. Cross, who has studied the DNA of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and prehistoric migrants to Europe, recently gravitated toward ancient Egyptian mummies because of the empire's tumultuous political history. At various points, it was conquered by Assyrians from the Near East, Nubians from farther south along the Nile, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, among others. Our question was, did those foreign conquests have a genetic impact, Cross says. Cross turned to a collection of 151 mummy heads only, from the ancient settlement of Abu Sir el Malek. Remember the name of the site where the mummies from this new study were found. Abu Sir el Malek, about 100 kilometers south of Cairo along the Nile. The settlement was devoted to Osiris, or Saw, the god of the dead, making it a popular burial spot for many centuries. The heads were excavated and removed from their bodies in the early 20th century and now reside in two collections in Germany at the University of Tübingen and Berlin's Museum of Prehistory and Early History. Basically saying that what was actually tested were mummy heads. These mummies were excavated from an archaeological site at Abu Sir el Malek. The heads were taken off of the bodies, and the heads is what were used for this particular study that we're talking about today. Okay, just so y'all can follow the narrative. Radiocarbon dating shows that the mummies spanned 1,300 years of ancient Egyptian history during many of the foreign conquests and then Egypt's incorporation into first the Greek and then the Roman empires. Okay, basically what they went on to say is that the time periods that these mummies were said to be from dated as far back as around 1300 to 1400 BCE, before the Common Era, to about 400 CE of the Common Era. Basically saying that Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in around 333 BCE. Okay, so these mummies, some of these mummies were from a site that was not only used before Alexander, during the time of Alexander, but even after the Greeks lost control of Egypt and the Romans took control of Egypt. So it's very important who was ruling Egypt and who was occupying that area during the time that these mummies were placed there. It goes without saying that if the Egyptian civilization never really recovered after Alexander the Great's conquest, anything after 333 BCE, it's obvious the genome or the genetic sequencing that you may find from some of the mummies, because it was invaded from outsiders. So it's a very good chance that you're not going to get samples from individuals who were there in, let's say, 2700 BCE or even 1900 BCE, you know, the actual founders of the civilization. But the article continues. Let's see. Whereas the mummy's soft tissue contained almost no DNA, the bones and teeth were chock full of genetic material. 90 of the mummies yielded DNA once housed in mitochondria, the power plants of cells. Mitochondria carry only a few genes, but they are so plentiful that it's often easier to find their DNA than the single full human genome in the cell's nucleus. Still, because mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mother to child, it leaves out the story of the father's DNA. The nuclear genome, which contains DNA from both parents, is far more informative. Unfortunately, Cross says only a few of the mummy's nuclear genomes from both mother and father were well preserved, and even fewer passed his strict contamination test. His team ended up with nuclear genome samples from only 3 mummies, each from a different time period. Okay, now we're talking about a time period of around 1000, let's say 1300, 1400 BCE to about 400 CE. Okay, we're talking about all of that time period, right? Now, out of all of the mummies that were there, they only took samples from about 90 of them. From those 90 that they admit were from different time periods, this could have been the time of the Romans, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, or the Egyptians, just to be fair. It could have been from any of those time periods, right? The majority of them only provided mitochondrial DNA evidence, which comes directly from mother to child. So, if per se, purely African Egyptian, well, scratch that. I won't even make that argument. I'll just let the evidence speak for itself. But the evidence from mother and father, which they admit what's the word that he used? Far more informative. You know, the nuclear genomes, which is far more informative when dealing with DNA genetic research, was only able to be used on 3 mummies from 3 different time periods. So now we're talking about 3 mummies. Now this could be talking about 1 mummy from the Roman period, 1 mummy from the Greek period, 1 mummy from the Assyrian period. We need more information. So I'm just stating this not to be for or against. You know, I have my own opinion. You know, I love Kemet. I love Egypt personally, but I want to be objective with this thing. But don't be misled by some of the titles of these articles and by some of the conclusions that are drawn. Look at it objectively and understand what's really being said. 3 mummies provided the informative genetic information, which comes from mother and father, and it was from 3 different time periods. But we're not 100% sure what time period that these individuals date to. Okay. We're gonna skip that. Yeah, you all can read. I don't want to keep reading. But I just want to come to some of the conclusions. Cross's team compared the mummies' mitochondrial and nuclear DNA to ancient and modern populations in the Near East and Africa. They discovered that ancient Egyptians closely resemble ancient and modern Near Eastern populations, especially those in the Levant. They discovered that the ancient Egyptians that were tested, closely resembled ancient and modern Near Eastern populations, especially those in the Levant. Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Israel, those areas are the areas that they're talking about when they are mentioning the Levant. Okay, so look up the article, read the article, do your own objective analysis of the information. But what I want to do for this particular video is I want to look at what could have possibly been from the earlier time periods, right? And here we will be dealing with my opinion and my assessment. Some of this data is is really new. It just came up. More tests need to be done. More things need to be considered before one can draw a definitive conclusion about what this information actually states and what it actually proves in the larger scope of what we call Egyptology, the study of Egypt. But I want to postulate and pose my own hypothesis about this Near Eastern connection, this connection to the Levant, which may stem. I'm not even going to deal with the European connection. My personal opinion is that's from the Greek and Roman period. It is what it is. But I want to focus on the Near Eastern connection and the Levant connection. And why do I want to do this? Because what I did, remember I told you all to remember the site that they found the mummies from, Abu Sir al-Malik. Okay, why did I tell you to remember that? Because I wanted to see what is this site? Where is this site that they found this information from? And so I looked it up online. Abu Sir al-Malik, however you want to pronounce it. It could be pronounced several different ways. What I found about it is interesting. It's very interesting. It says, the site served as the burial of the late Nagati culture and was reoccupied in the Hyksos period, the Sacian and Roman periods. The prehistoric cemetery, we can skip that. The graves of the Hyksos were dated by scarabs with royal names and contained skeletons which were determined anthropologically as belonging to the Semitic family. Right? So this site was used by the Hyksos, the Sacians, and the Romans, which would definitely explain why they had ties to Near Eastern populations in the Levant and Europeans. The Romans, the Sacians, and the Hyksos. Now, some people, and this is where I want to go with this video, some people say that the Hyksos could quite possibly have some type of relation to the Hebrews or the Israelites. And their story of being expelled out of Egypt had played into the narrative of the Exodus. But you have a lot of individuals in the community who claim that the Hebrews or the Israelites are black. Now these mummies, the earlier ones from this site, Abu Sir al-Malik, if these mummies are Hyksos mummies, then it is very telling about who the Hyksos are. So I'm showing here that these mummies were taken from a site, right? That site was called Abu Sir al-Malik, right? When you look into the site Abu Sir al-Malik, among other things, it is known to be a burial site that was used by the Hyksos. So who are the Hyksos? The Hyksos are a group of what the Egyptians called Asiatics. People from that region, that Levant region, who, you know, the data is still coming in, but it appears that they began migrating into Egypt peacefully, and eventually they basically took over a certain portion of Egypt, and they ruled for a particular amount of time until they were eventually kicked out. So what I want to do first is I'm gonna go to this book, Writings of Ancient Egypt by Toby Wilkinson, and I want to go to some of the primary documentation to prove that these Hyksos were actually there in the land. I mean, we already have them at the site, but to prove that they were not the native Egyptians. So any DNA that you may get from a Hyksos mummy does not definitively conclude who the natives were. Again, this is my hypothesis and my position. I'm just laying out a few of the facts, and I'm gonna try to go fast. I don't really want to make a long video. People attention spans, yeah, mine neither. But on what's known as the Kamos Stela. Kamos is one of the Egyptian pharaohs who fought valiantly against the Hyksos to kick the Hyksos out. I just want to quote a little bit of the Kamos Stela, and you all can look up the Kamos Stela to verify some of this, just to show that these people were outsiders who came into Kemet. Okay, so any genetic information that they may have brought, they brought from outside of Kemet. Okay, this isn't I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read some of it. Behold, this is Kamos on his stela. Behold, I am come. I have succeeded. I will not leave you alone. I will not let you walk the earth without my bearing down upon you. You are undone, cowardly Asiatic. I shall drink wine from your vineyard, which the Asiatics I captured will press for me. I have destroyed your dwelling places and cut down your trees. I have forced your women into the ships and taken away the chariots. Benighted Asiatic, you are undone. Cowardly Asiatic, who said, I am master without equal as far as Hermopolis. Even Gabalion brings tribute to Avaris between the two rivers. I have left them desolate and depopulated. I razed their towns. I burned their stores, leaving them smoldering mounds forever because of the damage they did in this part of Egypt by making it serve the Asiatics and forsaking Egypt, their mistress. Okay? Basically, you can just see that Kamos is the native. The Asiatics are the outsiders who have come in and usurped some of the land, and this is his stela commemorating his battles and his wars and his fights against these Asiatics, these who are the Hyksos, to kick them out. So any genetic information that these Hyksos had, they brought that genetic information in. Again, the history of, I want to go to one more book, the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt by Ian Shaw, talking about the Second Intermediate Period. And my book is page 199. Just to tie in this with the Hyksos and, you know, make my case a little more solid that these mummies who had Middle Eastern genomes or genetic information, and who had genetic information that tied them into the Levant. As I said, I'm already leaving the European genetics alone. These individuals were outsiders. It says 3 small cemeteries at the mouth of Fayum Oasis, Mayana, Abu Sir el Malik, and Garob, date to the period of the wars between the Hyksos and the Thebans, which is otherwise represented only at Memphis. These Fayum burials are Egyptian in character, with the bodies laid extended in rectangular coffins. At Garob, 2 burials contain Kerma ware pottery, indicating that they may belong to the Kerman Nubians serving in the Theban army. See below. One intact burial at Abu Sir. Okay? One intact burial at Abu Sir contained a scarab of the Hyksos ruler Kion, which provides a terminus post kim for the burial. So again, the burial site that they got these mummies from was used by the Hyksos. And these Hyksos were buried in traditional Egyptian fashion, laid in traditional Egyptian fashion in the land of Egypt. And they took on the mannerisms of the Egyptians. The Hyksos rulers, they call themselves the Nisut, or what you may know as the Pharaohs. They took on the role as Egyptians. They pretended to be the Egyptians, but they were outsiders who had invaded the land. One intact burial at Abu Sir, the same place where they got, for the article, where they got the mummies for the genetic study, contained the scarab of the Hyksos. Why would you use the scarab, Hyksos, if you're not pretending to be an Egyptian? Of the Hyksos ruler Kion, which provides etc., 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 showing that Hyksos rulers were buried here and regular Hyksos were buried here. The Hyksos used it among other invaders and other conquerors. Okay? So my position is, and I'm just gonna try to wrap this up. If an individual finds mummies at a particular site and they only get the informative DNA from 3 mummies, mitochondrial DNA information from 90 mummies, and they run a test on these mummies, and the test says that they are closely related to Middle Easterners, if they're closely related to individuals in the Levant, Turkey, and Europe, and you look into the history of the site, and the site was used by conquerors who the Egyptians called Asiatics and invaders and foreigners to the land from the Middle East, the Levant, and Europe. Well, what we may call Europe now, but Greece and Rome. You're almost, to me, you're only proving the conquest theory or the conquest model. Now, I've seen some people online saying that this proves that the Egyptians weren't black. Let's just be objective about it. The DNA test did show that whoever these mummies represent were more closely related to individuals outside of Africa than individuals from sub-Saharan Africa. And we know that the tests that were conducted on previous mummies, now they're admitting, if they hadn't already, but now they're admitting that test couldn't really determine between the contaminated DNA and the ancient DNA. And this test that was used on mummies from a site that's known to have been used by foreigners and conquerors. So have they found the Hyksos? And have they proven that the Hyksos were not sub-Saharan Africans, and that the Hyksos were purely, an Asiatic group of people? That's the deeper question that I want y'all to contemplate on, because some people say that the Hyksos are the Hebrews. But then you have people that say the Hebrews are African. So don't be so quick to jump up and say, oh, we have proof now that the Egyptians were not Africans. We may have proof that the Hebrews were not African. Did you ever think about that? We may have proof that the Hebrews were not African. And before I go, I'm going to just say that your boy Josephus, y'all love Josephus. Y'all love Josephus because Josephus talks about Jesus. You know, and people use Josephus to prove Jesus. So let's see what else Josephus has to say. Let's see what he says about the Hyksos and against Apion and his work against Apion. He says this whole nation was styled Hyksos, that is shepherd kings, for the first syllable HYC according to the sacred dialect denotes a king, as is SOS a shepherd. But this according to the ordinary dialect, and of these is compounded Hyksos. But some say that these people were Arabians. Maybe they were. Now, in another copy, it is said that this word does not denote kings, but on the contrary denotes captive shepherds. And this on account of the particle HYC, for that HYC with the aspiration in the Egyptian tongue again denotes shepherds. And that expressly also. And this to me seems more probable opinion and more agreeable to ancient history. Okay, he goes on to say that he quotes Menathos and saying that the shepherds built a wall around. Let's skip that. I want to get to this. Where is it at? Okay. Bam, here we go. They went away after being kicked out, the Hyksos being kicked out. They went away with their whole families and effects, not fewer in number than 240,000, and took their journey from Egypt through the wilderness for Syria. But that as they were in fear of the Assyrians, who had then the dominion over Asia, they built a city in that country which is now called Judea, and that large enough to contain this great number of men, and called it Jerusalem. So Josephus is here quoting someone and saying that when the Hyksos left, they left and went and founded Jerusalem. So are the Hyksos the Hebrews? Or the mummies that they tested the Hyksos? If so, by proxy, if the mummies that they tested are not related to the sub-Saharan Africans, and if the mummies that they tested, which are not related to the sub-Saharan Africans, are in fact the Hyksos, and if the Hyksos is in fact the individuals who founded Jerusalem, then the individuals that founded Jerusalem, the Asiatics that Kamos was referring to on the Kamos stela, are more related to Middle Easterners and individuals in the Levant than in sub-Saharan Africa, which is okay because they say that they came out of Canaan in the first place. But it would show a distinction between them and the Africans. I'm not going to go into this any further. Look it up. It's interesting information. Y'all have a nice day.